Picture this. You're standing in front of a massive stone circle that's been there for over 4,000 years. These aren't just any stones. Some weigh as much as 4 elephants put together. And here's the crazy part. The people who built this had no cranes, no trucks, no modern tools. Nothing. Just their bare hands, some ropes, and pure human determination. But wait, it gets weirder. Some of these giant rocks came from a place that's 150 miles away. That's like moving your house from New York to Philadelphia. But the house weighs 50 tons and you can only use wooden logs to roll it. For centuries, people have been scratching their heads asking, how the heck did they do it? Well, buckle up because today we're diving deep into the most mind-blowing construction project in human history. We're about to uncover secrets that will change everything you thought you knew about our ancestors. Let's start with what makes Stonehenge so absolutely bonkers. Imagine you're a tourist visiting this place for the first time. You walk up to the circle of stones, and your brain just stops working. Because what you're looking at shouldn't exist. The main stones, called sarsens, are like nature's skyscrapers. The biggest ones are 30 feet tall. That's 3 giraffes standing on top of each other. And they weigh between 25 to 50 tons. To put that in perspective, that's heavier than most fire trucks. Now imagine trying to move a fire truck without any modern equipment. Sounds impossible, right? But here's where it gets really wild. On top of these massive vertical stones, there are horizontal stones called lintels. These aren't just placed there, they're perfectly fitted, like giant puzzle pieces. And they're held in place by something called mortise and tenon joints. It's basically the same technique you'd use to build a wooden table, except these table pieces weigh as much as a school bus. The precision is mind-blowing. We're talking about Stone Age people creating joints so perfect that after 4,000 years, some of these stones are still locked together tighter than your phone case. Engineers today look at this and go, wait, how did they even measure this stuff? And then there are the bluestones. Oh boy, the bluestones. These smaller stones, and when I say smaller, I mean they only weigh about 4 tons each, which is still heavier than 2 cars, came from the Preseli Hills in Wales. That's 150 miles away from Stonehenge. Think about that for a second. You're living 4,000 years ago. You decide you want some specific blue rocks for your project. But those rocks are 150 miles away, across rivers, hills, and forests. So you organize hundreds of people to somehow transport these massive stones across the entire countryside. Without wheels. Without roads. Without GPS. It's like if someone today decided they wanted to build a monument in Chicago, but they absolutely had to use rocks from Denver. And they could only move those rocks by pushing them with their hands. You'd think they were crazy. But our ancestors actually did this. Multiple times. They moved around 80 bluestones from Wales to Salisbury Plain. Each journey would have taken months, maybe even years. Entire generations of people dedicated their lives to moving rocks. The questions just keep piling up. Why these specific stones? Why this exact location? How did they know the stones in Wales even existed? How did they transport them? How did they lift them? How did they position them so precisely? For hundreds of years, people came up with wild theories. Some said aliens built it. Others claimed it was the work of giants or wizards. Even today, you'll find people who swear that ancient humans couldn't have possibly built something this complex. But here's the thing. They absolutely could have. And they did. The real story of how Stonehenge was built is actually more incredible than any alien theory. It's a story of human ingenuity, determination, and cooperation on a scale that would make our modern construction projects look like child's play. Scientists have been studying Stonehenge for over 300 years. They've used ground-penetrating radar, 3D scanning, chemical analysis, and even DNA testing on ancient remains found nearby. Piece by piece, they've been solving this 4,000-year-old puzzle. And what they've discovered will blow your mind. The people who built Stonehenge weren't primitive cave dwellers. They were sophisticated engineers who understood physics, astronomy, and mathematics in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. They had to figure out how to quarry massive stones without dynamite. They had to invent ways to transport multi-ton rocks across vast distances without vehicles. They had to develop lifting techniques that could raise stones higher than a 3-story building. And they had to do all of this while coordinating the work of thousands of people over several generations. The more we learn about Stonehenge, the more respect we gain for our ancestors. These weren't just people randomly stacking rocks. They were master builders who solved engineering problems that would challenge us even today. What do you think? Are you starting to see why Stonehenge has fascinated people for so long? Drop a comment below and let me know what aspect of this mystery intrigues you the most. Alright, let's talk about where these massive stones actually came from. Because if you're going to build something impossible, you first need to find impossible stones. The story starts about 20 miles north of Stonehenge, in a place called the Marlborough Downs. Picture rolling hills covered in what looks like a giant's rock garden. Scattered across this landscape are enormous sandstone boulders called sarsen stones. These aren't just big rocks, they're geological monsters that formed over millions of years. But here's the wild part. These stones weren't just lying around waiting to be picked up. Oh no, that would be too easy. Most of them were buried underground or partially embedded in the hillsides. Our ancestors had to literally dig them out of the earth. Imagine you're a Stone Age person, and you've decided you need a 50-ton rock for your project. You don't just walk up to a stone and say, "Yep, that's the one." You have to study it, test it, make sure it's the right type of stone that won't crack when you try to work with it. Recent discoveries show that these ancient builders were incredibly picky about their stones. They didn't just grab any old rock. They specifically chose sarsen stones that had a particular hardness and durability. Scientists have analyzed the chemical composition of the Stonehenge stones and traced most of them back to one specific area in the Marlborough Downs. This means these people somehow knew exactly where to find the best quality stones. They had developed a deep understanding of geology without having any textbooks or fancy equipment. They could look at a stone and know whether it would survive being moved 20 miles and then shaped into a monument that would last thousands of years. But getting the stones out of the ground was just the beginning. Have you ever tried to dig a hole in your backyard? Now imagine digging around a boulder that weighs as much as a house. You can't just use a shovel. You need organized teams of people working with antler picks, wooden levers, and stone hammers. Archaeological evidence shows they created elaborate systems of ramps and pits to extract these stones. They'd dig trenches around the stones, then use wooden levers to slowly work them loose from the earth. It was like performing surgery on a mountain. Now let's talk about the bluestones, the ones that came from Wales. This is where the story gets absolutely crazy. These stones came from a very specific location in the Preseli Hills, about 150 miles away. But they didn't just come from anywhere in the Preseli Hills. They came from particular outcrops that the ancient builders had somehow identified as special. Recent research has revealed something mind-blowing. The bluestones weren't just random rocks that happened to be blue. They were carefully selected from sources that had specific acoustic properties. That's right, these stones were chosen partly because of the sounds they make when you hit them. Scientists have discovered that many of the bluestones ring like bells when struck. Some researchers think Stonehenge might have been designed as a massive musical instrument. Imagine that. A rock concert that's been going on for 4,000 years. But how did people living on Salisbury Plain even know about these special stones in Wales? This suggests there was a sophisticated network of communication and travel between different regions. These weren't isolated tribes randomly building monuments. They were part of a connected culture that shared knowledge across vast distances. The evidence shows that people were traveling between Wales and southern England regularly, trading goods and sharing ideas. They had established routes through the landscape, river crossings, and probably even staging areas where they could rest during long journeys. Some scientists think the bluestones might have been considered sacred or magical. Different types of stone were associated with different powers or purposes. The builders of Stonehenge might have believed that only these specific Welsh stones could provide the spiritual or ceremonial power they needed for their monument. Here's another mind-bender. Geological analysis shows that the bluestones were quarried using surprisingly advanced techniques. The ancient miners created precise extraction points, using controlled fracturing methods that wouldn't look out of place in a modern quarry. They understood the internal structure of the rock and knew exactly where to apply pressure to split stones cleanly. And it wasn't just a one-time operation. Evidence suggests that stone extraction and transport continued for generations. This wasn't a quick project. It was a multi-generational commitment that required maintaining knowledge and techniques across decades or even centuries. The scale of organization required is staggering. Think about it. You need teams of people quarrying stones, teams transporting them, teams preparing the site, teams shaping the stones, and teams assembling the final structure. All of this had to be coordinated without phones, email, or even written language. Yet somehow they made it work. They created a supply chain that moved hundreds of tons of stone across the British landscape with nothing but human power, wooden tools, and incredible determination. The stone hunt wasn't just about finding rocks, it was about understanding the land, respecting the materials, and creating a system that could sustain one of humanity's most ambitious construction projects. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be part of one of these ancient quarrying teams? Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have been tough enough to handle Stone Age construction work? Now comes the part that makes engineers wake up in cold sweats. How do you move a 50-ton stone 20 miles without any modern equipment? How do you transport 4-ton bluestones across 150 miles of rivers, hills, and forests? For the longest time this seemed impossible. But archaeologists and engineers have spent decades figuring out exactly how our ancestors pulled off this incredible feat, and the answer is both simpler and more ingenious than you might think. Let's start with the sarsen stones, the local giants. The journey from the Marlborough Downs to Stonehenge might have been only 20 miles. But when you're moving something that weighs as much as a small building, every mile is a nightmare. The key was something called a wooden sledge. Picture a massive wooden platform, kind of like a giant sled, but instead of being pulled by reindeer, it was pulled by hundreds of people. The stone would be loaded onto this sledge using a combination of ramps, levers, and probably a lot of prayers. But here's the genius part. They didn't just drag these sledges across the ground. That would have been impossible and would have destroyed the sledges in minutes. Instead, they used wooden rollers. Imagine dozens of tree trunks laid out in front of the sledge, creating a temporary wooden road. As the sledge moved forward, the rollers at the back would be picked up and moved to the front. It was like creating a conveyor belt made of trees. The sledge would roll smoothly over these logs, and teams of people would constantly be repositioning the rollers to keep the road going. Recent experiments have shown that with enough people and enough rollers, you can move incredibly heavy objects this way. A team of archaeologists successfully moved a 40-ton stone using Bronze Age techniques. It took about 200 people pulling in coordination, but it worked. The coordination required was extraordinary. Imagine being the person in charge of moving a 50-ton stone. You need teams of people managing the ropes, teams repositioning the rollers, teams scouting the route ahead, teams clearing obstacles, and teams providing food and water for everyone else. And this wasn't a quick job. Moving a single stone from the Marlborough Downs to Stonehenge would have taken weeks or even months. The procession would have moved just a few miles per day, setting up camp each night like a massive traveling circus. But the real challenge was the terrain. The route from the Marlborough Downs to Stonehenge isn't flat. There are hills to climb, valleys to cross, and rivers to ford. Each obstacle required different techniques and solutions. For steep hills, they would have needed to build elaborate systems of ramps and possibly even modify the landscape itself. Archaeological evidence suggests they may have created temporary earthworks, essentially building their own hills and valleys to make the journey easier. River crossings were particularly tricky. You can't just roll a 50-ton stone across a river on wooden logs. They would have needed to build temporary bridges or causeways, or find very shallow crossing points during dry seasons. Now, let's talk about the bluestones and their epic 150-mile journey from Wales. This is where the story gets really incredible. Recent research suggests they used a combination of land and water transport that was far more sophisticated than anyone previously imagined. The journey probably started with the stones being moved overland from the Preseli Hills to the Welsh coast. This alone would have been a massive undertaking, using the same roller and sledge techniques as the sarsen stones. But then comes the water phase. Scientists think the bluestones were loaded onto wooden boats or rafts and transported along the Welsh coast, then up rivers into the English countryside. This wasn't just a simple boat ride. It was a complex navigation challenge that required detailed knowledge of tides, currents, and seasonal water levels. The boats themselves would have been engineering marvels. They had to be strong enough to carry 4-ton stones without sinking, but also maneuverable enough to navigate rivers and coastal waters. Recent discoveries of Bronze Age boats show that ancient shipbuilders were incredibly skilled at creating vessels that could handle heavy cargo. The water route probably followed the Welsh coast, crossed the Bristol Channel, then went up the River Avon. This would have avoided the most difficult overland terrain and made the journey much more manageable. But even the water transport required massive coordination. You need teams of boat builders, navigators, and cargo handlers. You need to coordinate with tides and weather. You need backup plans for when things go wrong. And things definitely went wrong sometimes. Archaeologists have found evidence of bluestones that were abandoned along the route, probably because they fell off boats or got stuck in difficult terrain. Our ancestors didn't have a 100% success rate. They just kept trying until they got it right. The final phase of the journey involved getting the stones from the River Avon to the Stonehenge site. This would have required switching back to land transport. More sledges, more rollers, more hundreds of people working together. Recent computer simulations have shown that the entire bluestone transport operation would have required coordinating thousands of people over several years. It wasn't just a construction project. It was a massive social undertaking that brought together communities from across Britain. The logistics are mind-boggling. You need to feed and house all these workers. You need to maintain and replace equipment. You need to coordinate schedules and manage resources. All without any written records or modern communication systems. Yet somehow they made it work. Stone after stone, mile after mile, they transported the raw materials for one of humanity's greatest monuments. It was a triumph of human cooperation and ingenuity that we're still trying to fully understand today. What amazes you more? The engineering solutions or the incredible teamwork required? Let me know in the comments what you think was the biggest challenge in moving these massive stones. Alright, we've quarried the stones, we've transported them across the countryside, and now we're standing at Stonehenge with a pile of massive rocks. Now what? How do you actually build a monument that's been puzzling people for thousands of years? This is where our ancestors had to become master architects, engineers, and construction workers all at the same time. And the techniques they used were so clever that modern engineers are still impressed by their ingenuity. Let's start with the foundation. You can't just plop 50-ton stones anywhere and expect them to stay put. The builders of Stonehenge had to create foundations that could support incredible weight while keeping everything perfectly aligned. Archaeological excavations have revealed an intricate system of stone-lined pits called Aubrey holes. These weren't just random holes, they were precisely positioned in a perfect circle, each one carefully measured and placed. The builders somehow managed to create a 300-foot diameter circle that's accurate to within inches. But here's the mind-blowing part. They did this without any modern surveying equipment. No GPS, no laser levels, no measuring tapes. They used ropes, wooden stakes, and pure mathematical understanding to create geometric perfection that would make modern surveyors jealous. The foundation work was like solving a massive 3D puzzle. Each stone had to be positioned exactly right, not just for its own stability, but to properly support the stones that would be placed on top of it. They had to account for the weight distribution, the ground conditions, and the long-term settling of the monument. Now let's talk about the real challenge: lifting these massive stones upright. Picture this: you have a 50-ton stone lying on the ground, and you need to stand it up vertically. In the modern world, we'd use cranes. But our ancestors had to get creative. The most widely accepted theory is that they used a combination of earthen ramps and wooden levers. Here's how it probably worked. First, they would dig a sloping pit on one side of where the stone needed to stand. Then they would slowly lever one end of the stone up while building a ramp of earth and stones underneath it. As the stone got higher, they would keep adding to the ramp, essentially building a temporary hill that the stone could slide up. Once the stone was nearly vertical, they would use ropes and wooden levers to tip it into its final position. But the precision required was extraordinary. These stones couldn't just be close enough to vertical. They had to be perfectly positioned to support the horizontal stones that would be placed on top of them. A few degrees off, and the entire structure would collapse. Recent experiments have shown that this process would have required hundreds of people working in perfect coordination. Some would be managing the ropes, others would be operating the levers, and still others would be building and adjusting the ramps. It was like a massive slow-motion ballet performed with multi-ton stones. The horizontal stones, called lintels, presented their own unique challenges. Imagine trying to lift a 7-ton stone 16 feet into the air, and then position it perfectly on top of 2 vertical stones. This might be the most impressive engineering feat of the entire project. The solution they came up with was brilliant. They built temporary wooden platforms that could be raised gradually, lifting the lintel stones higher and higher until they could be slid into position. It was like building a wooden skyscraper just to place one stone, then tearing the whole thing down and starting over for the next stone. But the real genius was in the joinery. The builders didn't just balance the lintels on top of the uprights, they created sophisticated joints that locked everything together. The tops of the upright stones were carved with rounded projections called tenons, while the lintels had corresponding holes called mortices. This mortise and tenon system meant that the lintels couldn't slide off even if the ground shifted or the stones settled over time. It was like creating a giant stone jigsaw puzzle where each piece was custom fitted to its neighbors. The precision of this stone carving is absolutely remarkable. Remember, these people were working with stone hammers and antler picks. They had to shape massive stones with hand tools, creating perfectly fitted joints that would last for thousands of years. And they didn't just carve the joints, they also shaped the stones themselves. The uprights were carefully tapered to create an optical illusion that makes them appear perfectly straight from a distance. The lintels were curved to follow the circle of the monument, with each one precisely calculated to create a perfect ring. The assembly process would have required incredible teamwork and communication. Picture dozens of people working on wooden platforms 16 feet in the air, slowly maneuvering multi-ton stones into position. One mistake could have been catastrophic. But somehow they made it work. Stone by stone, joint by joint, they assembled one of the most precise stone structures ever created. The tolerances they achieved were so tight that many of the joints are still perfectly fitted after 4,000 years. The entire construction project probably took several generations to complete. It wasn't built all at once. It was a multi-phase project that evolved over centuries. Each generation added to the work of their predecessors, maintaining the same standards of precision and craftsmanship. What's really amazing is that they did all of this without any written plans or blueprints. The entire design existed in the collective memory of the builders. They passed down techniques, measurements, and design principles through oral tradition and hands-on training. The finished monument was more than just a pile of stones. It was a testament to human ingenuity, determination, and cooperation. It showed that with enough creativity and teamwork, seemingly impossible challenges could be overcome. The construction of Stonehenge wasn't just about building a monument. It was about proving that humans could work together to create something that would outlast them by thousands of years. And in that goal, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Which part of the construction process amazes you the most? The precision of the joints, the lifting techniques, or the incredible teamwork required? Share your thoughts in the comments below. So there you have it, the incredible true story of how Stonehenge was really built. No aliens, no ancient technology, no mysterious powers. Just human ingenuity, determination, and the most impressive teamwork project in ancient history. Think about what our ancestors accomplished. They identified the perfect stones across vast distances, organized massive transportation operations, developed sophisticated construction techniques, and created a monument so precise that it still amazes engineers today. All with nothing but hand tools, wooden equipment, and an unshakable belief in their vision. The next time you see a modern construction site with its cranes and bulldozers, remember that 4,000 years ago, humans were moving 50-ton stones and creating perfect stone circles using nothing but their intelligence and determination. If that doesn't give you goosebumps, I don't know what will. But this is just the beginning of the Stonehenge story. We've covered how it was built, but we still don't fully understand why it was built or what it was really used for. The mysteries of Stonehenge run deeper than just construction techniques. If you want to dive deeper into the secrets of ancient civilizations, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got videos coming up about the real purpose of Stonehenge, the astronomical alignments that might blow your mind, and other incredible ancient engineering projects that seem impossible but were totally real. Drop a comment below and let me know what ancient mystery you'd like us to tackle next. The Great Pyramid? Easter Island statues? Machu Picchu? The ancient world is full of incredible stories waiting to be told. And if this video amazed you as much as it amazed me while researching it, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves history or engineering. Trust me, they'll thank you for it. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey through time. Until next time, keep questioning everything and never stop being amazed by what humans can accomplish when they put their minds to it.